They
Mhm.
believed in me when I did, and
Mhm.
they were willing to tolerate where I was at. And I say tolerate, that sounds negative, but
Right.
they were willing to meet me where I was.
I mean, if I'm being honest with you, when I became blind at 16, and
Yeah.
then as I grew in the organization and met more blind people, I recognized that the only limits that existed for me were the ones that I was putting on myself.
You learned that a lot faster than I did.
When adversity came, I could have fell apart, but I chose instead to follow my heart. When adversity comes, I will never run, I will adjust, adapt, and overcome. Vision. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome all to your one-stop shop for everything empowerment. I am your host, Tariq Williams, Vision of Hope. And you know what we do here. Not only I am Vision of Hope, but we are Vision of Hope. And welcome back to the next episode of the podcast. And we have an amazing guest for us today to talk to us about leadership and, you know, all things in terms of progression moving forward in the organization he's the president of. I'll introduce you all to the one and only President Mark A. Riccobono of the National Federation of the Blind.
Well, glad to be with you, Tariq. It's a pleasure to be here on your podcast, and really happy to share the vision, I guess.
There you go. That's it. Absolutely. When it comes to, moving forward and continuing to build, when I think about the National Federation of the Blind, it's hard to not think about President Riccobono not saying, "Let's go build the National Federation of the Blind."
Yeah, well, you got to have a signature,
There you go. Absolutely. So for those, and we're going to have some individuals here who aren't completely familiar with the National Federation of the Blind. I've talked about it a few times, but first, with the National Federation of the Blind, the world's largest organized blind movement, um, and you're the president of this organization. So, when you think of how you got to where you are right now, what's one word that comes to your mind?
Well, I think for me, the word would be synergy, um, because first of all, nothing happens because of one person in a real movement. When we have a movement and we have organizational structure, there has to be a leader. For a while, America experienced what they called leaderless movements, but the funny thing about leaderless movements is there were people that went around and taught people how to build leaderless movements. Well, they were leaders. So I think a synergy, because it's really about bringing the right pieces together at the right time and recognizing opportunities, and then taking advantage of those opportunities to build, to make connections, to dig deep sometimes on hard issues, and find a way to make connections where other people don't necessarily find
Mm, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we're gonna talk a lot about that word synergy. And you mentioned a bit about all the pieces kind of coming together of the organization. Truly, what synergy is, it doesn't take only one person. But let's talk about, and to be clear, let's talk about a younger President Riccobono for a moment.
it.
Walk,
Okay. Yeah.
walking into the organization for the first time, and possibly even your first convention. And we'll talk about the National Federation of the Blind National Convention coming out being fairly soon.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
When you first joined the organization, was this a role that you possibly saw yourself in?
Oh, definitely not. My first experience, I had heard about the National Federation of the Blind. not always in the best terms. I had applied for scholarships many times. I had heard about the Federation from teachers in the field of blindness, and they weren't particularly fond of the National Federation of the Blind, particularly because at that time in the state that I grew up in, Wisconsin, the Federation affiliate, really the national organization, but the Federation affiliate was pushing for higher standards for teachers in Braille education. And I knew the teachers better than I knew blind people, and the teachers were my mentors to some degree. And you know, some of them were quite negative about the idea of higher standards for Braille. So when I kind of hit rock bottom at the University of Wisconsin, because I didn't have any blindness skills, I didn't know I was a blind person, I couldn't compete. I fortunately got offered a scholarship by the National Federation of the Blind of Wisconsin. And I like to say that I got a scholarship because I was the only applicant that year. And I needed the money, but more importantly, I needed the connections. And they said, get on a plane and go to Anaheim, California and come to our national convention. Well, okay, sure. I didn't really know what that meant. But our convention in 1996 was at the Anaheim Hilton. And when I walked into the Anaheim Hilton, my life changed really in an instant. And some people might think I'm being dramatic, but it's true. It was like a completely different world. And it wasn't just in that hotel, it was when I left. I had a completely different outlook on life and an understanding, a growing understanding. I certainly didn't know everything I needed to at that point, but that there were more possibilities than I ever knew. And so the organized blind movement really, again, at a synergistic time when I most needed it, connected with me. And I think my soul, my spirit has always been in sync with really the spirit of the Federation. It's what you feel when you come to your first convention, but it's what I continue to feel resonate in Federation meetings, in hotly debated issues, in the personal conversations with people about the life struggles they're having and how to overcome discrimination.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. You know, but you mentioned the phrase rock bottom,
Mhm,
right?
yeah.
And I think that's a place where, unfortunately, I'll say it's a part of any individual's journey, hitting that rock bottom, right? So, what did that look like for you specifically, and what made you realize that you deserved more?
Oh gosh, well, what it looked like for me, so I grew up in Wisconsin. I was diagnosed as being legally blind at age 5.
Mm,
I have glaucoma and aniridia, but at age 5, I was just legally blind. So I really lost vision throughout my younger years. And the professionals really didn't make an effort to recognize that uh, it was only going downhill from being legally blind. And so there was no real preparation for me to do things as a successful blind person would.
mhm,
And we could talk a lot more about that. But I'd like to say I was just smart enough. I was just smart enough to get by. I was great at faking it. I was an expert at faking it. I could fake that I could see anything. People never challenged me, so I faked my way through. But most importantly, from my hardworking Midwest parents who graduated from high school but didn't have any college education, I just
mhm,
learned to work hard, and I
mm,
just knew that I couldn't see so well, and so I should work hard. And so I worked harder than pretty much anybody else around me, and that allowed me to push through. But when I got to the University of Wisconsin, which fortunately I had mentors who encouraged me to to apply there. I was going to, apply for much smaller, more limiting schools, but they said, yeah, you have the grades to do this. But I had no idea what I was getting into or what I was going to have to do to compete. And so when I got to the University of Wisconsin, I was able to fake it pretty well in my freshman year.
Yeah.
But in my sophomore year, everything kind of started to fall apart. The relationships that I was in started to kind of deteriorate, partly because I didn't really know and have confidence in myself. I didn't know how to access various things. I was in a computer class. This is where we find out what generation watches this podcast. This is the class was featuring products from Windows 95. But there were no accessibility tools, no screen readers, and I almost failed the class. And I couldn't read my own notes. I had note takers that the university provided, but I couldn't read their notes. I had to memorize everything. And fortunately, there were people around who, would say, you don't have to be in the dumps here, but they didn't know what to do about blindness either. And so I just, I don't know. Fortunately, I had enough internal hope. I would say I'm mostly an optimist. So I just started reaching out, and I reached out on an email listserv that I found for blind students, and I think it was I don't remember the exact list, but a gentleman who was a Braille teacher in Madison, Wisconsin, sent me an email and said, well, I can talk to you about being a blind person, no problem. So we made a plan to meet somewhere, and I chose a place that I knew I could get to during the day, and I showed up plenty early.
Right.
And here comes this totally blind guy, whizzes right by me. I was standing outside, and he, confidently walks inside, and I'm like, hello, I'm out here. And we just sat down and had lunch. And I was blown away that he was doing things that I in my core wanted to be doing. He was, he owned a home, and he lived alone. He tended his garden, and he played guitar, and he traveled the world, and he looked for new experiences. And he just talked to me about, well, just living life as a blind person. Honestly, I could have been more at rock bottom, but I think even looking back, I didn't know at the time really how bad it was.
Right.
And again, fortunate that I was able to make connections at the right time. And I guess what motivated me to realize there had to be something more, I just, I felt it. I didn't know what, but I knew that somebody had to know something about how to deal with living life with vision loss. And I would certainly not have really used the word blind at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to go back to a few of the different things that you said. The first one being, you're right. There's a group of people on here wondering, Mom, Dad, how did we go from Windows 95 to Windows 10?
That's Windows 11, Tariq. You got to catch up.
Sorry. There you go, Windows 11.
Yeah.
And a couple of the other things is, when you mentioned success and blind and everything, I think people might not recognize the potential of what a blind person can do. And you're here speaking to that. I remember my first National Federation of the Blind convention, and I remember thinking that I still wasn't sure what was possible for me. And when you walk into a hotel and there's thousands of blind people just going about their business, it'll change you a little bit,
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
because then you start we start putting the phrase self-efficacy into place, when you
Right.
start seeing other people role modeling and doing the things that you want to do,
Right.
it's it's incredible. It's incredible.
Right.
It's quite a feeling, especially when you talk about the fact that you're not exactly sure what's out there for you in a place of uncertainty, but then in the back of your head, you said it, there's got to be something out there more for me.
Yeah. And I think so often um, people um, who are blind, who have internalized the low expectations of society, when they come across other people, they tend to feel like, well, that's those people can do it, but not me. And
Mm,
I had some of that. I didn't understand why. Anaheim, California, and I'm listening to these students. We're out by the pool, and they're talking about how long their cane is, and I'm like,
right.
guys, we're in California. Like, why are you talking about the length of your cane?
Right.
And I just had no concept that I could do the things they were doing, honestly. But I kept coming across people who said, look, you can do better than this, and we'll show you how. They
Mhm,
believed in me when I did, and
mhm.
they were willing to tolerate where I was at. And I say tolerate, that sounds negative, but
Right.
they were willing to meet me where I was. And
Mm,
and unfortunately, I think sometimes when we catch the fire and we really
mm,
understand what's possible, we tend
mm,
to overwhelm people with uh, what's possible, not recognizing that it's really hard to go from 0 to 100. And
mm,
we do have to simply uh, demonstrate that we believe in blind people, and we believe in
mhm,
their capacity to do the things that blind people do. And
mhm.
people are going to take that at their own pace. But I certainly didn't have a concept that I could do it. I saw other people do it though, and so
Yeah.
I wanted to figure it out.
I mean, if I'm being honest with you, when I became blind at 16, and
Yeah.
then as I grew in the organization and met more blind people, I recognized that the only limits that existed for me were the ones that I was putting on myself.
You learned that a lot faster than I did.
We all go on our different journeys, and I'll say this, if what you just said is true, it speaks to the synergy
Mhm,
that the National Federation of the Blind is creating
mhm.
and is making happen for blind people across the country, and the example that we've created for the entire world. And as a member myself, as co-chair of the membership committee, shout out to my other co-chair, Miss Denise Avant. Um, we truly speak to the fact that it's a membership driven organization, and it's truly about supporting others, being a resource for others, and that's the best way to be. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think support in the most positive sense, right? It's not a
Mhm.
pity party.
Yes.
It really is about recognizing that, well, number one, we're stronger together,
Mm,
and number two, um, no one else, no one else can truly believe in you as a
mm,
blind person, like another blind person. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people who are blind at heart, and they get it. They get it in the right way. But partly they get it because they know that it's not their lived experience. And so they can get it. But when you can get not just one or two, but 10 blind people, 50 blind people um, who get you because they've lived it. They've had the experience. They've been pushed and pulled and treated in that way. It makes a real difference. And so the
mhm.
support is sometimes having your back. The support is sometimes um, having someone jump in to kick and scream about the discrimination that you're facing, and sometimes it's just someone to be pissed off with about how hard some of these situations can be sometimes. So support in many ways, and the community is really what's powerful.
You know, I couldn't agree more. You talk about the community and blind people living their lives and um, support in the highest sense. I completely agree. It is not a pity party by any means. Um, you know, it's a quick funny story before I transition us a little bit.
Yeah.
So my college roommate, and at this time in undergrad, I hadn't fully found the organization yet. I heard there was some blind people doing something, but I wasn't too sure what was going on. So I didn't necessarily I didn't know too much at the time. Um and so a few years after that, my college roommate actually did athletic training for an NBA basketball team. At that time, I believe it was the Washington Wizards at that time,
Mm.
and they had their summer league in Las Vegas. And he calls me, and I hadn't talked to him in at least a few years. Okay.
Mhm.
And he goes, Tariq, are you in Vegas right now? I see all these blind people in suits walking around. What's going on? And he calls me, and I answered him, I was like, you got it. I like, you know that there's something going on. And it
Yeah,
was really
right.
funny. So we got to connect, and he wanted to know what I was doing with my blindness and how I was moving forward. And we got to connect. It was really neat 'cause I was a much
Nice.
different person at
Yeah.
that time. So let's transition a little bit, because let's talk about the word leadership here, because I think that you mentioned before that you didn't recognize, and I would say this, a lot of other individuals don't recognize that they have the potential to be the leader that they can be or are.
Mhm.
And then for some reason or another, they end up in that situation. And you mentioned that when you first joined the organization, there was no way you didn't see yourself being the president of the National Federation of the Blind. And so I'll ask you, what does it mean to be a leader of an organization?
Um, well, what does it mean? Well, I would say a couple of things. One is the first thing that comes to mind is responsibility, right? Um, a lot of times when you hear leader, people want to go to honor and respect, but it starts with responsibility, recognizing that leadership is taking responsibility.
Mhm,
And that's not easy. That's not easy.
mhm,
Sometimes it's taking responsibility. Well, it's always taking responsibility for yourself, but oftentimes it's taking responsibility for others, and not just taking care of others, watching out for others, looking out for the best interest of the group. It's also having people's back, right? And
mhm,
making sure that as the leader, you are taking responsibility, even when it's not your responsibility directly to be taken. Um, uh, I tell the staff who work for the National Federation of the Blind, I will always stand in front of the membership and take responsibility for a mistake you made. Unless, of course, you did something illegal, in which case I'm not taking responsibility for that.
right,
But
right.
we all make mistakes, and so I'm always, because I'm not going to throw people under the bus. It's about, so first of all, responsibility. Secondly, it's about recognizing that leadership takes different forms, and even leaders need to be followers at different points. So um, when people invite me to come speak, this podcast is a good example. I say, great. What do you want me to do? And they say, "Oh, talk about whatever you want." No, why are you inviting me? What purpose do you have that I can help fulfill?
Right.
And if you tell me I want you to speak for 10 minutes, I'm going to speak for 10 minutes. Now, if I really feel like I need an 11th minute because I have something very important that I think is going to build, I'll let you know. But if
Start
you tell me
catching some
10 minutes,
fire.
yeah, if you tell me 10 minutes, I'm gonna fulfill that assignment because I assume, the people I'm working with know what they're doing. And look, my time is valuable, but other people's time is valuable. So
Right.
responsibility and accountability and having other people's back, and then recognizing that we all have room to grow. And even
Mhm.
in leadership, we have room to grow. Sometimes that means taking a step back and recognizing that you haven't always done the right thing, um, and learning from it and trying to grow. And that's where synergy comes in. If you're not learning from the mistakes you made, and frankly, I get frustrated when people expect perfection out of leaders. We should have a very high
Mhm.
standard for leaders, but the fact of the matter is, people are still people, and
Mhm.
perfection is not a standard that can be met. And perfection is something that keeps people out of leadership.
Mhm.
Um, often in the Federation, we say, well, is the leader 51% good? Now, I hope to be better than 51% good, right? But at
Right.
the end of the day, is the analysis is the leader better than not? And we hope that most leaders are way better than not. But perfection is a very hard standard to meet. But
Mhm.
you have to, when I think about leadership, you have to be prepared to take an honest look at yourself and continue to develop and grow, because we know that all great nations, organizations, leaders that have fallen because they've failed to evolve, change, grow. And unfortunately, sometimes in 2023,
Mhm.
we want to be very critical about people changing and finally having an awareness, to use, I guess, the political term, being woke. But
Mhm.
that's a positive trait, right? And sometimes, sure, it's too late, yeah, too little, too late, maybe. But it's a positive thing when people evolve, grow, and we should respect people who do that. Um, and especially leaders, because it's a little bit harder um, to exhibit the humility to say, you know what, I was completely wrong on that,
Right.
because there's a lot more heat. So I guess those are my quick reflections on leadership, ramblings on leadership right here.
But it's true though. I think we often I'll say this. It's interesting how people work, right? Because we talk about the fact that things in life or people or et cetera aren't perfect, but then we're upset when things don't always go our way,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And so finding ways to continue to be resilient through these different situations is so important. I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not a perfect individual. I was still on Windows 10 a few minutes ago, right? Luckily I
I
had
haven't
President Rick.
updated. I haven't updated. So.
Okay, all right. But luckily I had President Riccobono here to let me know, hey Tariq, Windows 11, come on, man. So but it's true, no one's perfect. And
Yeah,
so but it's one thing to say that, right?
yeah.
It's one thing to say that no one's perfect and we have to develop and evolve as individuals, but it's another when you're actually going through the adversity of
Hmm.
taking that responsibility um, in different situations when you're going through the struggle. So, if you had some advice right now for someone who is a leader in their own right, or someone who is attempting to become a leader, and they recognize that it's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows, because I'm sure being president of the National Federation of the Blind is an amazing job, but it comes with its own right of struggles and adversity.
Yeah.
So, what does it really mean to go through that adversity and be an example in those situations?
Well, um,
And
it's not,
I brought
it's
I brought
not,
up.
no, it's not easy. It's not easy. And, you know, frankly, if leadership was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? And
Mhm.
some people make a conscious choice that they prefer to be in the background, but I would actually say that's leadership. I think when you recognize that you thrive, your contribution is to be behind the scenes making things happen. That's leadership. When you recognize the talents that you bring and how you can fit um, into an ecosystem, I think that's leadership. But um, leadership in its true form is difficult. And as a leader, and I will say, I think to some extent, we've gone through a period of time in America, at least, where yeah, leadership is almost a bad thing, right? Because we're always looking for the bad guy. You know, who's the bad guy? And sometimes it feels like just simply being the leader, some people view as that's the source of the problem. So part of the adversity is being willing to take a step back
Mm.
and reflect and ask yourself the honest questions about the criticism you get. And I think you need to do that personally. But fact of the matter is, none of us, certainly not me, can do it alone. And so you do need people, call it whatever you want, an inner circle. You need a group that is going to tell you the truth.
Mm.
The
Mhm.
truth may not be what you want to hear, uh, but you need a group of people who's going to give it to you out of love and respect, and who's also going to have your back to say, look, you're on the right path, stick with it. Um, you're you're not only are we with you, we're gonna, what do you need us to do to help? And you need a group like that. All of us need a group like that.
Mhm.
Sometimes what you need to do in adversity is hopefully you've surrounded yourself with folks that are going to recognize that you're facing adversity.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and then I guess the last thing I'd say about it is my experience now approaching my 47th birthday is that the human spirit, the human uh, ability to overcome adversity is much more amazing than we understand. I've experienced it myself. I've observed it in other people. I try to identify it when I come across it
Mhm.
as a tool to help me recognize that, sure, whatever adversity I am facing, I'm going to feel like it is the worst situation that any human has ever been in.
Mhm.
But I've seen a lot of work. I've seen a lot of situations, some of them personally. I think about, um, you know, people that I know that have uh, had lots of tragedies in their life, and they still forge on and are some of the most positive forces that I know. Or
Right.
people that have had uh, faced surgery after surgery after surgery to battle cancer or other diseases, and they
Mhm.
don't let it stop them. And I
Right.
think, man, I stubbed my toe and I'm like, I gotta sit down, you know. uh,
Right. Right.
so but it's hard to describe, because I think at the end of the day, you have to have an internal willingness
Mm.
to face adversity and
Mhm.
recognize that um, you know, you can't experience great love unless you've experienced great pain.
Yeah.
And that's just a truth in life. Uh, it's a very hard truth sometimes, a very hard truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting because there's this common phrase when people are down on themselves in different situations or things aren't going their way. You mentioned reflection and sitting back and reflecting for a moment. Not often do people talk about the fact that sometimes, like they always say, take 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, right?
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
it's not often recognized or noticed that sometimes you got to take 1 step back to go 5 steps forward.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so that was one point I really wanted to bring up there. The other thing is when you talk about surrounding yourself with people who recognize that you're also going through adversity, we recognize that we're both going through different types of adversity. I was on a podcast quite a while ago talking about the word empathy. And I'm at a place where I believe that it's not possible to have too much empathy for a situation or for a different person,
Mm,
because if I have the utmost empathy for you and you have the utmost empathy for me, we can connect on a level to build each other up.
mhm.
Um, and so those are just the points that I really wanted to make there, 'cause I think it really speaks to the synergy that you've been talking about.
Yeah.
Now, when I think of synergy, there's nothing like the National Federation of the Blind National Convention when you got all those canes tapping and you got all those blind people together and this the strength of the organization. Um, if you may, there's a convention coming up. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Sure. So we'll be having the annual convention of the National Federation of the Blind this year. Will be in Houston, Texas, from July 1 to July 6th, and we certainly invite everybody to come. The online registration will have closed for the in-person convention by the time this is out in the universe, but you can always show up at the convention and register on site. And you can also register at any time for the virtual convention experience. Not at all like being in person, but it's a good alternative, and you can do that anytime. So visit nfb.org/convention to get details. But um, look, we're a membership organization of blind people. We're made up of affiliates in each of the 50 states, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, and the convention is the annual meeting of the national body where the affiliates come together to do the business of the organization. It is the largest gathering of people with disabilities on an annual basis anywhere in the world. And it is truly the expression of an independent blind run movement. You will not find anywhere on this globe an organization that has since the beginning, for as long as we've been doing it, been completely blind led, run, decisions made, completely centered on blind people. And that's really what makes the convention positive and powerful, is that uh, if you are not a blind person, you are not in the majority. And uh, what we do is bring people together to try to set an agenda for the next year or years ahead. And we try to hold accountable those entities that may need to learn more about the blind community and recognize that they're responsible to the blind community, whether it's the government or agencies for the blind or companies wanting to sell products to blind people. And then we try to push and raise expectations for each other even further. So how can we get blind people not to settle for where we are? All of us can be pushed just a little farther and a little harder to stretch ourselves. And so the convention brings us all together. And our convention, part of the power of it is so multi-generational. This year at our convention, we'll be celebrating the 40th anniversary of having the National Organization of Parents of Blind Children as part of our organization.
All right.
And when you think about that, that's, going on 2 generations of parents who have been raising blind children in the organization. And so you have people that have been part of the organized blind movement coming to conventions since the 1960s. We have still 1 or 2 people who first came in the 1950s, but not too many. But you got all generations coming together, people that are a variety of ages, and blind parents with very, very young children coming to the convention. And it's that diversity and that the multi-level generational experience coming together, working together, and dreaming together. And there truly is nothing like it. And I guess the other piece that makes it really spectacular is when we say run by blind people, it's not just the leadership. The convention happens because of blind people. Blind people working the hallways to provide information about how to get around, helping at the registration line, or giving out information in the exhibit hall, watching for problems, serving coffee in the presidential suite. Blind people make it happen, and our friends and family. And we could not do the convention without, hundreds of blind volunteers who make it run.
Wow. I can't help but to think, as you're speaking, about the first time I did anything in the National Federation of the Blind. And I remember an individual asking me, "Hey, Tariq, do you want to come out to this chapter meeting?" And if I'm being honest, I said, "Nah, it's a no for me, dog." Straight American Idol. And and I think about the amazing things this organization is doing, what it's done for me. And I encourage everyone out there listening. It might be the National Federation of the Blind. It might be that new job, that new career, Harvard Law School, et cetera, whatever it may be. Put yourself in those situations. Don't worry about where you're not. Put yourself where you want to be. And I think that's just so important. And you never know, like, the possibilities are truly endless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one reason that the Federation works as a movement is the fact that the secret sauce is that we learn more about ourselves from contributing to the movement than we expect. I think a lot of us, me included, got interested in the organization because we recognized that it made a difference to us personally, and so we wanted to help out. But the secret is, it's actually in starting to teach other people that you learn more about yourself, and that's where the synergy comes in, right? So, and I felt that at my very first convention. I had gotten to know some of the leaders in the student division of the Federation, and they shared with me their authentic experience and wisdom. And so when it came time to do some fundraising for the students at the convention, no one asked me, would I jump in and help? I saw there was a need, and I believed in these people who believed in me. And so I jumped in and helped. And no one said, whoa, wait a minute, you just showed up. Why don't you just sit on the sidelines? They said, They great. Thank you. And I learned a lot about myself just by jumping in to help and recognizing
Yeah,
that in that process, I didn't even have to fake what I couldn't see. I mean, it
right,
was so different than anything else because nobody cared what I could see or
right, right. You know, President Riccobono, I have to be honest with you though. I was a little bit disappointed when you said when you didn't say the secret sauce of the organization that it wasn't honey mustard.
not.
I was really banking
No,
on
no,
that.
no. That was the last president. He liked mustard. Yeah, yeah.
No, honey mustard to be specific, or hot sauce. One of the two. But
There you
no,
go. Yeah.
I completely get it. You know, I typically ask for one word to close us out, but I really feel like in this conversation, it really starts when we talk about leadership. It really starts and ends with synergy. And so, if I could ask you before we wrap up here, if there's anything, last words, advice, individuals who want to be a leader, afraid of, what could be out there for them, et cetera, et cetera. What are some of your final thoughts, last words, for the people on the podcast today?
Well, the last words I would say is all of us have the potential to lead, and leadership looks different uh, in many different contexts. We all have the potential and opportunity to be leaders, and the way that we build ourselves is to be part of something that is making a difference. We haven't talked about it, but part of the reason I say synergy is because the Federation demands a lot of its leaders. And so when we talk about leaders of the Federation, there's a lot of great leaders in our movement. But part of the reason they're good leaders is because the people around them, the members, demand that they're good leaders. They demand that they have a high ethical standard, that they meet a strong code of conduct. They demand that they're tireless advocates for blind people. And so just by being part of a positive group and also being willing to be a positive force in that group, you can become a leader in your own right. And I would invite you to own what that means for you, but also don't be afraid when someone recognizes leadership potential in you.
Mm,
Step up to that challenge. You may decide at the end of the day that it's not, being out front is not for me. Sometimes people say being out front's not for me, but they've never actually tried it.
mm,
So take the risk and try it. Recognize that if you're afraid of it, that's a good thing.
mm.
You have to be afraid to stretch yourself. Any situation I've ever been in where I've grown, I was scared to death. I'm scared to death right now. I'm trying to engineer a $20 million project to build the Museum of the Blind People's Movement. We haven't had a chance to talk about it here, but
Mhm.
you can learn about it at the convention. It's the biggest thing I've ever taken on in my life. It scares me to death. I have nightmares about it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there are people, well, I believe in it, and there are other people that believe in it. And I'm confident that because a community believes in it, it's going to happen and it's going to change lives. So um, be part of something bigger than you, and don't be afraid to be vulnerable to opening your heart
Yeah.
to the fear, but also the strength that that community can bring to you and push you toward. And um, I think fear is a great instinct because it
Yeah.
also tells us when we're challenging ourselves, and you need that community to support you when you're challenging yourself. So thank you for letting me be here. I feel like this leadership ramblings has been kind of fun, and we're going to get together and have some honey mustard soon, right?
That's it. Absolutely. At the national convention.
That's
Let's
right.
get
That's
it.
right.
And thank you for the vulnerability that you showed today on the podcast. When I think of the leadership roles I've had, it's you spoke to this, and I just want to emphasize it. Sometimes you have to find ways to be comfortable with the uncomfortable and find
Mhm.
ways to move forward through it. And
Yeah.
that's a conversation on adversity that we spoke about. Surrounding yourself with the right people, that synergy, that energy, and just continue moving forward. So, President Riccobono, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Been my pleasure. Let's go build the Federation.
Not only I am Vision of Hope, but we are Vision of Hope. Thank you for listening, everyone. When adversity came, I could have fell apart, but I chose instead to follow my heart. When adversity comes, I will never run. I will adjust, adapt, and overcome. Vision.